I feel like I'm getting to meet a very realized version of Alok, but I can't imagine that in Texas as a kid, you were as realized as you are now. And I was reading that you were bullied a lot. So I think bullying is a broad term. If you can take me back to little Alok, what did that look like and feel like for you?
My deepest and youngest memories that I still have access to were the sense that I was wrong and could do no good, that I had to continually prove and justify why I deserved to be alive. And so bullying, I think often the focus is always on what people are saying, like a slur. But I actually think the real psychic dimensions of bullying are how it lives inside of you after the fact. I think you'll maybe get attention when you say, people were yelling at me in the hallway, but I think the real traumatizing story is, and then I started to yell at myself. And what yelling at myself looked like was, and then I stopped wearing what I wanted to wear. I stopped allowing myself to feel. I stopped allowing myself to be honest. That is the real devastating toll that I have to take inventory of on the other side. And I think that's the work that I'm doing right now, is to actually realize that, like, hatred was implanted in me and I chose to keep it there because I thought that I deserved it. I thought that there was no other way for someone like me to exist without having to apologize for being alive. And so I think that it's difficult because so much of what the pain of bullying is happens internally, not externally. But it feels like people only want to notice with the external, not the internal.
In your book, Beyond the Gender Binary, you dedicate it to everyone who has been made to feel like they were too much or never enough. And I was like, okay, so everyone. As you sit here today, do either of those come up for you?
I think I have a daily relationship with both of those. I feel like every time I've achieved a new stratosphere of self-acceptance, then something else happens and I'm like, oops, starting from square one. And it's kind of frustrating because I thought healing would be put in the time, you put in the work, and then you're there.
Yeah.
But what I've learned actually is that you have to continue to meet the task of saying, am I going to prioritize the healed version of me? Am I going to operate from a higher frequency? What I'm starting to actually realize now is that it's more about developing a discipline and a practice than it is about having a destination. And that's why I've been saying authenticity is an orientation, not a destination. Because every day, how cool it is that we get the opportunity to recommit ourselves to our highest self.
As I was reading your bio, you have a lot of titles, right? I mean, you're author, activist, performer. I see you as an artist because I always think that artists are orchestrators of our attention. And to me, that is one of your deep gifts. And then I read that you used art as a way to sort of heal when you were a kid. What did that look like?
Thank you for saying that, because I feel like artist is the only identity I've ever selected for myself.
Yeah.
Everything else was people telling me, this is what you are. And artist was something I said, yeah, this is who I am on my own terms, because what I like about it is that it resists definition. It's not about saying I'm a poet or I'm a comic. It's about saying, in every scenario, I'm going to pursue the creative choice. Artistry is a practice of noticing what people say is impossible and saying, I beg to disagree.
Say that again.
Yeah, noticing what people say is impossible and then saying, I beg to disagree.
I was having a meeting in New York one time and someone said to me, what do you think the most pivotal thing is in raising a successful child? And I said, confidence. And they said, art. And I said, art? Out of all the things? And they said, if you immerse your child in art, they learn confidence. They learn how to think. They learn all the things that you're wanting and asking for. Think about like all the great people in your life. There's art there somewhere.
That's so true.
Blew my mind.
Yeah, you're giving me vocabulary to understand my own childhood. I was super fortunate because both of my grandparents on my mom's side were artists. My grandmother started painting in her late 70s after she got arthritis. So she would just make these abstract paintings out of tools from the kitchen. And my grandfather was a novelist and a playwright.
Wow.
And he would write with a quill pen, like dipping it in ink and writing it down.
That's so cool.
And whenever they were making art, I was always, as a kid, told, don't disturb them, they're making art. There's this idea that art making is something sacred. We need to reserve time for it. And so I was always encouraged, not just what I thought, but expressing what I saw in the world. And I think that's where a lot of my courage and my conviction came from, is that I had people around me who were curious about my point of view in the world.
Many of the trans stories that I hear explained are transitioning from one gender to another. And as I was reading about you, I was thinking, like, I'm not sure that resonates. Does that?
No.
Will you say more?
Yeah, sure. I see the true transition for me was not on gender. It was from dissociation, living what other people wanted me to be, to lucidity, living how I wanted to be, to actually cultivating presence and awe that I'm alive, which is why I think that it was pretty smart of me to choose being alive, because I think many people are on autopilot, existing but not living. And gender is only one precipice of a larger conversation of how we exist in a world that only cares for us if we perpetuate some fantasy of what it wants us to be. And very rarely are we asked who we want to become. And so I made the decision to become my best version of myself. And that was less of a before and after, an A or a B, but a daily practice of saying, how do I live with integrity and authenticity? And it was less about saying I was a boy and now I'm non-binary, to saying I am Alok and I'm figuring it out. Less a journey with a fixed destination and more an embrace of fluidity.
So when I read about this story of you telling your grandmother, it was really hard to read. You said, when I first told my grandmother I was transgender, she responded, "How could you do this to me?" In her eyes, my journey was about hurting her and not about healing myself. I feel like the reality for a lot of trans people is that, speaking of the word limitless, like you mentioned, the options are not limitless. I have a friend named Jacob who told me that they were 8 and thinking, like, who's gonna hire me? What job am I gonna do? What were you thinking when you were 8 years old?
I thought I'd be murdered.
Really?
Yeah. I genuinely believed that if I expressed myself, I would be killed. So in many ways, I don't think I was allowed to have a childhood writ proper, because safety was my first and foremost preoccupation. So I had to really think, is my voice gonna betray me? Are my gestures gonna betray me? Are the people that I'm friends with gonna betray me? And even if I didn't have a vocabulary to describe what I feared, I knew that it had to be feared. And that's why I think it's a miracle that I'm alive. And that's why I'm so happy and grateful for all the strategies that my childhood mind developed to keep me alive, because I don't know if I would have had the strength now. I think oftentimes we say, what would you say to your younger self, as if we know better? But I think it was the inverse for me. I think my younger self was so courageous, so brilliant, and so aware, pre-verbal, pre-language, pre-identity, knew that people were threatened by their freedom and found a way to incubate that freedom inside of themselves so that I could live the life that I live today. And I know that everything that I am today is the embodiment of that wild dream.
I try and, when I prep for interviews, put myself, like, I do a visualization and I put myself in that person's body. And I was thinking, I wake up every morning in a body and walk out into the world, and in many ways am really affirmed by the world. I, like, feel emotional when I think about waking up in a body that is constantly told, no, you're wrong, you're not good enough, whatever those words are. I read that you said people would just call you ugly.
Yeah.
That word itself is, like, it's traumatizing. What does that do to your psyche? Like, I know now you have vocabulary to share what it felt like, but I'm trying to understand what it's like as a kid to grow up in that.
It was awful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and that's why I fight so hard. I'm not trying to transmit the pain or make people suffer in the way that I did. I'm trying to transcend it so that no one has to go through what I went through. I feel a lot of grief on how institutionalized violence has become in my day-to-day. So say, for example, last week I had a gig in a state in the South, and I was wearing a dress and heels because I felt like it. And then I was like, oh crap, I'm about to go to an airport. I don't want to get assaulted. So then I had to change, wipe off my makeup, take off my lashes, put myself into sweats. And then I was like, I shouldn't have to do this. And then I thought, how many people have to do this? Have to think about every single thing they're doing in a day and anticipate, will I get killed?
Yeah.
And that's my day-to-day. Where am I going to be? What time am I going to be there? Who am I going to be with? And I have to develop a way of cluing my friends into that. Like, hey, I'm in a car right now and I don't feel safe. Can I share my location with you? And I think I have a lot of grief on what I would wear, who I would be, how I would exist in the world if I wasn't conditioned to fear violence at every single moment, what I would have tried out, what risks I would have taken. Because I think it seeps into arenas that you wouldn't think are related. Like, I think that, for example, I've recently started acting, and acting is extremely hard for me because I look at the camera and I'm like, I exist. And then I have to become aware of how deeply dissociated I was, because dissociation protected me from violence. So if someone was spitting on me on the street, they weren't spitting at me. It was something happening to a character. But now in acting, I have to accept it's me and I'm responsible for if I have resting bitch face or not. And that's really hard and jarring because I'm like, oh my God, I'm in control. I didn't know that. And so there's so many parts of me that are conditioned by fear, and I'm trying to heal. But how do you heal when I get re-traumatized over and over again? That's what I also am trying to wrap my head around, is to what we were talking about before. I feel like I've reached a new zenith, like I've done this, I accept me. And then I wake up to 10,000 comments telling me that I'm disgusting, that I deserve to be incinerated. I mean, some of the most cruel things I've ever seen in the world. And as much as I can say I love myself, when you're up against that relentless tirade, how do you continue?
You write, accessing this beauty can feel impossible in a system that rewards conformity over creativity. But in my experience, a commitment to honest self-actualization yields unparalleled peace and conviction. Self-actualization over a quest for beauty. I think so many women can really relate to that. What makes you feel beautiful?
I feel most beautiful when I'm telling the truth. Beauty is less about a physical attribute and more about a spiritual sense of living in my purpose. When I'm betraying my purpose is when I feel most ugly. And that's what's so funny when people call me ugly. I'm like, huh, you think this is ugliness? Real ugliness is self-betrayal. The real ugliness is a society that can't escape small talk. Are
there any tools or practices you use to challenge the world's views of beauty? Because I think that's something everyone can.
I guess I'm no longer interested in challenging. I was in the past. But now I've started to realize I can't actually change other people's minds. Which is like a real FU to my childhood trauma. Because so much of being a child for me was trying to convince people to like me so that I could be safe. And so much of being an adult is realizing people still didn't protect me. Didn't matter. So actually, instead of trying to convince other people that I'm real or that I'm beautiful, why do I need other people's validation? I'm going to believe it myself. I'm going to live my best life. So I think so often people write about my work as if I'm challenging beauty standards or challenging gender norms. But I'm like, those beauty standards and those gender norms don't exist. So I'm not challenging anything. I'm just being myself.
Right. That's an interesting distinction to make. I remember, did you ever watch Girls? You know, like, Lena Dunham, everybody would write, like, she's so courageous. And she was like, I'm living in my body and I'm naked. I'm not courageous. I'm just being. And it changed the way people saw things. It actually moved the culture ball forward, I thought.
Well, I think you're diagnosing what's exactly wrong in this moment, is that we're politicizing being. Like, so often when I see people on their anti-trans agendas, I'm like, you're literally saying that we don't get to exist. That's what this is about. That's all we're fighting for. We're literally just fighting for the right to exist. And yet people make that into an agenda, make that into propaganda, make it into these highfalutin concepts. All I am asking for is the ability to exist. Why then are people so threatened by my mere existence? It's because it clarifies that they don't know their own. That's what it's ultimately about.
So I was actually going to ask you that, because I watch a ton of political shows, and nearly every single one, there's a topic on transgender rights, transgender something in sports, and less than 1% of the population is transgender. The outrage is so outsized. What is it hitting in people? What do you think? What is it? To me, I like look at it and I'm like, is it that they hate women and so they hate femininity? Like, what is it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've got your finger on the pulse here. People are upset about trans healthcare in a country where there is no healthcare. People are upset upset about transgender participation in sports, let's be clear, like 12 athletes, instead of world hunger.
Right.
Right? Like, actually, not a contradiction. That's the calculations made by people in power to manufacture made up issues. They're so obsessed saying that we're making up genders, but plot twist, people in power are making up political issues as a way to divert attention from the real ones and continue to have you go to the polls to elect politicians who are going to monopolize and maintain their power.
Yeah.
So actually what it's about is just scapegoating. It's a long and dangerous history of taking a targeted and vulnerable minority, saying that we have access to some kind of mythological authority and power as a diversionary tactic, a weapon of mass distraction to divert people's attention from the real issues that are affecting their day-to-day lives. And that's why I have mercy and compassion for a lot of these people in my comment sections, because I know that they're also being used and duped by a system that's making them have outrage about what I look like and not about the fact that they don't have enough money to buy property anymore, not about the fact that they don't know how they're going to survive in 5 to 10 years. And that's why I understand that anger actually is an easier access point than grief, and that it's easier to demonize and hate me than it is to actually have to confront the intimate betrayal of the people who have said that they're on your team and on your side, but are actually manipulating you.
Did all of the bullying follow you to college when you were at Stanford?
Actually, not as much at Stanford.
That's cool.
At Stanford, I actually had the space to explore who I was on my own terms. That's when I started to play around with fashion. And I think I was in this kind of like mini lab of self-expression that kind of didn't prepare me for the quote unquote real world. Because when I would walk down the street in a dress, everybody would be like, oh yeah, that's Alok. You know, everyone knew who I was. But then when I moved to New York City, I was like, okay, this is not the same walking down the street at all. At Stanford, I think the kind of bullying that I experienced was less on the basis of my identity and more on the basis of my imagination of what we should be using our education for. Most people went to a school like that because they wanted to enter within the system, make a lot of money, and have no responsibility to giving back to the world.
Yeah.
And I was the one with a megaphone during our free speech hour being like, let's actually talk about human rights crises. Let's actually use our location at this university to care about bigger issues. And people would be like, why don't we just party? So it was a lot of like, not negativity on my identity, more negativity on me being like, let's give a shit.
Well, that's actually kind of great though, right?
Yeah.
To be like assassinated on your
Yeah.
ideas and not your character.
Totally.
Yeah. So you did your master's there too, right?
Mhm.
What did you do your thesis on?
So I wrote about the LGBT movement in South Africa, where I had the opportunity to work with transgender organizations for a while there. And that
Why South Africa?
So South Africa had the most progressive constitution at the time for LGBTQ rights, but some of the worst hate violence. And so I was interested in the limits of the law. And that really has informed my approach in the US too, where I think people are so obsessed with non-discrimination protections. And obviously those are important, but we have to change the hearts and minds of people. And we keep on assuming that if we change policy, that's going to change how people interact with each other, and that's just not true. So if anything, my experiences in South Africa taught me about the importance of culture and of artistry.
Yeah. There's a word, tell me if I'm messing it up, but there's a word that what is the language in South Africa? It's
In Zulu or Xhosa.
It means like hello, goodbye, and something, but what they're really saying, the greeting is I see you. It's not just a hello, which I thought was so beautiful because language informs our culture so much.
Right, so beautiful.
So you write, I do not request nor require your acceptance. What I ask for is your curiosity. You're on the podcast of curiosity. I'm obsessed with questions. Why do you ask for curiosity?
I just feel like it's a lot of pressure to be certain about the world. Like every day people are asking for a degree of conviction that I find is so appalling.
Yeah.
Like, who are you? I don't know. I think I am is one of the most cursed sentences in the world. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And genuinely, that's a straitjacket. I might change tomorrow. And I think the best part about being human is that we change. Like, if I was to look at what I was wearing now, 10 years ago, I'd be like, what are you doing? Right now, it makes the most
Right.
sense. At the time, I was like, never. And I think that's the joy, is that we're constantly changing, right? And so what I notice is that a lot of times people have rigid ideas of what we're supposed to be doing with our lives, how we're supposed to look, what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. And I want people to get curious on where those ideas came from and whether they're actually serving them. And I think by and large, they're not.
You know what's funny is the first time I met Gloria Steinem, I was like, Danielle, what are you going to ask this icon that you've read every word of? And I had like 3 seconds and I said, is it a lot of pressure to be the one with all the answers? Like everybody turns to her for what is feminism? What's the answer to this? And she was like, no, I don't feel pressure at all. And I said, how? And she was like, because I don't have all the answers. And it was like such freedom because I looked at somebody like that and thought, oh, they have to have all the answers.
Totally. I think actually the smartest people are the people who are most honest about what they don't know.
Yeah.
And I think what's been really frustrating about the past few years is, as trans people, we have to like have this manual every time we come out to be like, here's exactly what it means to be trans. Prenatally, I was playing with dolls, everyone. So I've always known. If you look back, I've always known. Like, we have to perform this absolute certainty. Because right now, certainty is coupled with our access to basic human rights. And I actually think that that's an unfair onus, because we don't ask cis people, when did you know you were cis? We don't ask cis people, when did you choose to be a man or a woman? We assume and we naturalize that. It's because trans people are seen fundamentally as disorderly or wrong that we have to legitimize ourselves. But I think the intervention should not be, I've always known. The intervention should be, none of us really know. Let's just take faith that self-declaration is the closest that we have.
Amen. Because of your experience, you have such a distinct way of looking at the world. Do you ever look at someone like me who fits within a gender binary and think like, you're really missing out?
Well, okay, first of all, I would say that I don't see you as fitting in the gender binary. I don't think the gender binary at all is about what we look like. I think our appearance actually is not where our gender lives, it's where our heart is, actually. And so I don't think we can tell people's gender based off of their physical appearance. We have to have deep conversations with them. And I'm sure that if we were to get to know each other better, you would defy so many ideas of what you were told a woman should be in society. And you will have declared your own path. And that's all I'm asking people to do, is to actually say these categories aren't as honest as my stories. And I actually feel like, and maybe we were going to talk about this a little bit in the future, I actually feel like all of us know the kind of loneliness of having people misperceive you, of looking at you and making a set of assumptions about who you are, what you've been through. And I would never want to do that to anyone. I want to feel awestruck by people. And I feel like when we just flatten people to like what their lives look like on the outside, we lose the capacity for awe. And so I think the reason I'm so interested in conversations like this is that they're constant everyday reminders that people are so cool and extraordinary, and against like all odds, they continue to like be beautiful, by which I mean be themselves.
You give me awe when I hear you speak. You constantly make me think differently about things. You expand my mind. Okay, so your use of color really stands out to me. And I can't help but think, and tell me if I'm projecting, but you're such a beautiful writer. And I think about the symbolism of color in literature. There's this book called The Giver. Are you familiar with it? So for anybody who hasn't read it yet, it's a dystopian novel and there's no color in society. And then there's a 12-year-old named Jonas, and he starts to see color for the first time. And he sees it as an expression of individuality, which the society is trying to withhold. They're trying to be conformist so that there's no differences and no arguments and no problems. And I read that book and I'm like, you're Jonas. What is your use of color? How do you think about color in the way you dress, in the way, I'm sure you paint, like you're such an artist. How do you look at color?
First of all, I'm feeling emotional because that was one of my favorite books as a kid, and I totally forgot about it. So thank you for bringing it back into my life, and I am going to reread it as an adult. I remember resonating with that so much. And once again, when you're a child and you don't have the language, but you have the affinity, You're like, I really feel this. I can't explain why. I can't draw the parallels. But I think what it helped me understand is like, I see the world differently than other people. And I feel punished for the way that I see the world. Yeah, color for me is about mental health. I've been really excited by seeing Gen Z talk about dopamine dressing.
I've never heard of this.
Okay, so basically, like, the world is cruel and miserable and awful. So a life hack is to dress in the most colorful and zany way to continually inject joy into your life. And so what they're basically trying to say is like, we're not dressing to please other people. We're dressing to make ourselves happy. And that's where I started to find color, as I was like, dang, there's so much misery around me, so much drabness. I want to be able to catch glimpses of myself and be like, woo, I'm excited to be here, you know?
Yeah.
I'm opting into this life. And so every time I'm composing an outfit, I don't care about what a shirt is supposed to be, or what a skirt is supposed to be, or what prints go together or not, or what colors go together or not. I care about how it makes me feel, and my goal is joy. And we notice in our society, we think of color as immaturity, and going into whiteness or going into blackness as being mature, as being more professional. But I actually think that that's templated on how our definitions of maturity in our society are incorrect. Maturity for me is emotional intelligence, and colors are where emotions live. So I want to see your full emotional display. And that's why if I go to any party and everyone's wearing all black, I'm out. I'm not going to be interested.
How do you exist in New York?
Oh my gosh, I'm just not going to those parties, that's for sure.
That's really cool. So one aspect of gendering in society is definitely fashion, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
You corrected me quite well when I thought about it being about our appearance, right?
Yeah.
Oh, can you talk about how the gendering of fashion is relatively new in concept?
Yeah, totally. So people don't understand that you would have been arrested wearing the outfit that you're wearing right now if you were walking in downtown LA in the early 1900s.
Okay.
Because people who were presumed to be women were seen as cross-dressing if they weren't wearing a skirt or a dress. It was in fact seen as so inappropriate that it would lead to, quote, the collapse of civilization. Where are we hearing that? And then how did we get the right for women to wear pants? It was because women began to organize and protest, actually go out into public, risk arrest, be arrested, be physically abused and taunted. Many of these people were lesbians, so shout out to the lesbians. And they fought to destigmatize it such that now we can have conservative political commentators who are in pants telling us that men in dresses are cross-dressing. So your very ability to condemn me actually comes from the same history that I'm fighting against. So actually, we already have a precedent here that what we see as gender transgressive wasn't. It was just misogyny and patriarchy, because the reason that we were uncomfortable with women wearing pants was because we were uncomfortable with the idea of women not needing male escorts. In fact, the term public woman was a slur for sex workers, because people couldn't imagine that a woman would be in public without a male escort unless she was soliciting sex. They couldn't imagine that a woman could be independent. So the fear of women in pants was actually about economic independence for women. And it was a fear of males losing power and authority. So the exact same dynamics are happening now when we think about the gendering of skirts and dresses, right? Actually, clothes have no inherent gender. They don't think, they can't declare themselves. If a man wears a skirt, it's not as if his manhood melts off of him. These are all social conventions. And so my campaign to degender fashion is actually about saying, we get to determine what clothes mean to us. For you, wearing a dress might be an affirmation of your femininity. For me, it might not have anything to do with gender. That's cool, that they all mean different things.
Yeah.
And give up that responsibility to the individual rather than the marketing. So I'm not asking for new, boring, gender-neutral collections that are always all gray and like tragic, which feels like a form of homophobia to begin with. Like, why are you gonna give us the ugliest clothes and call that gender neutral? What I'm actually asking for is that we recognize that all clothes are already gender neutral. So cast models of all different genders in part of your campaign.
Yes, all clothes are already gender neutral.
You could be out here in a full face of makeup, a full wig, a 7-inch practical heel. I always need to say practical because we live in a culture that is constantly shaming us for heel wearing.
Yeah.
And I want to say it can also be practical if your goal is your mental health. Thank you. And a practical 7-inch heel. And that could just have nothing to do with gender. That could just have to do with that person's individual self-creativity.
Right, it's the shoes you want to step into that
Yeah.
day. So in Vice, you wrote, the majority of people still believe what trans is what we look like and not who we are. We are reduced to the spectacle of our appearance. And you advocate for people to be regarded in their full personhood. there's this long history of trans femme bodies being reduced to a metaphor, a symbol, a fantasy, these ideas. And yet trans people are the most erased from the LGBTQ movement. Would you say that's true?
Yes.
I've heard some people say that bisexual people have the most erasure, but I don't know. It's not like the oppression Olympics here, but
Right. And there are trans people who are bi.
right. How do you explain to people that we're all dressing up every day?
Well, okay, so here's the problem. People never want to be explained to. So, as a matter of fact,
Explain to me, please.
as a matter of fact, if I was to tell people, hey, you're dressing up, they're like, what are you talking about, right?
Right.
So instead of doing that, I make art. And what I hope that my art is like a big sound bath across the world where people can just put in some headphones and reflect on their own lives. People think that I'm just writing about my own life, but I'm actually asking a question to the entire world. And that's what I've learned as a poet, is that the more particular I am at writing my own story, the more universal it resonates. And that's what's so annoying about all these Hollywood execs who think, well, no one's going to care about your experience as an Indian gender nonconforming person. That's kind of niche. And I was like, actually, your racism's kind of niche because it's dying and it's not no longer relevant. And so actually we need robust and diverse storytelling because that creates more arenas for people to reflect on their own lives, right?
Yes.
And so what I hope is that if people see an image of me and they're like, oh, why is that man playing dress up? That then they're going to continue to see images of me because we're not going anywhere. And then they're going to be like, we're all playing dress up because here's the truth, plot twist. We're souls all playing dress up. So actually being in a body is the ultimate form of drag, you know? And everything after the fact is an approximation of what our soul is. And so once I started to realize that, I was like, oh, actually, there's no more pressure. I can wear whatever I want.
Alok, being in a human body is the ultimate form of drag.
Yeah.
You're so right.
And it's all play. Because at the end of the day, these are
That's amazing.
going to disintegrate and decay. And yet we act as if they are, so it's so funny to me how people say like biology as if it's forever. You're gonna die. Like, I don't know who else to tell you that, but like actually your biology is going to literally just become the earth. That what you think of as permanent is not permanent. You wanna know what is permanent? Your integrity.
Yeah.
What is permanent is your honor. What is permanent is the way that you treat people, your kindness, how you show up in the world, because that, like the bullying, is going to create ramifications that exist on and pass throughout generations. Do you think that 10 generations from now, they're going to be concerned with whether or not I had facial hair and a profile picture or not? No, they're going to be concerned about how I treated people. So what it strikes me as necessary is to notice all the things that they think of are real, as material, as serious, and all the things that they think of as superfluous or excessive or juvenile, and to flip them.
Yeah.
Because often I think it's the things that we dismiss the most that are the most beautiful and magnificent.
The things we dismiss the most. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, fun.
We dismiss fun?
I think we exist in a culture that requires us to hustle all the time. That's like, okay, you can take a vacation, then come back in. Or you can retire, or even worse, you can wait until you die, and then you can go to heaven, and then you can have fun there. And so, honestly, when I'm walking around in LA, we talked about this a little bit before, in LA more than anywhere else in the world, if I'm around in this outfit, people will be like, what are you dressed up for?
No, they don't.
Oh, all the time. They're like, are you going to an event? Are you going to a function? I'm like, what a meager understanding of the world. The main event, the main attraction is that I'm alive. How about you? And so actually,
Do their jaws drop?
Yes. I'm having fun right now. I'm just dressing to have fun. But where along the way did we learn that we could only have fun in discrete moments? Coachella weekend, and not that every single day could be the festival culture that you seek. It's a culture that requires us to have escapism, so that we can default back into dissociation and just function like we're robots. I'm not interested in that. And so fashion is my way that I puncture through, that I can actually be like, every single day is so much fun.
You know what's funny as you're saying this, Alok, is I'm Jewish, and our culture, in my experience, is very much serious. And like there's been so much sacrifice and generational trauma that it's like, fun. What's fun? What are we doing today to move forward? You know, like it's so, and it wasn't until I started dating people from other cultures that I realized that I was missing out on all this fun.
Yeah, I mean, as an Indian, I grew up in a very similar dynamic where I've
Yeah,
been making
Indian
this,
families are like that too.
I've been making this joke on stage. My mom always gets so uncomfortable, but I say, my grandfather survived the refugee camp so that I could spend all day taking glamorous selfies with eyelashes so long they look like pubic hair, just sweeping the floor as I walk in. And what I'm trying to basically say there is, okay, we talk about how our ancestors suffer. Did they suffer so that we could suffer too? No, they suffered so that we could live a better life. So when are we going to live the better life? Because I grew up constantly being told you should be grateful for the compromises that other people made. Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to live my best damn life.
That's the covert from my first question.
There you
That's
go.
one of the covert things.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like in my family, I was so punished for living a fun first kind of life because people would be like, well, you have to think about getting your needs met, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, what if we were to see mental health as the need? Once again, something immaterial that's material. What if my goal was to actually be 86 and look back on my life and be like, I had the time of my life? Then every decision I'm making is not irrational. Every decision I'm making is so that when I die, I can look back and be like, this was amazing.
So you're living a fun first life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to adopt that. I really like that.
I mean, it gets me in bad places. Like I really should be sleeping more. So I want to like the pendulum can't swing too far. Like we also need to we need to think about balance. And
But you work a lot. Is your work fun to you?
So much fun.
Okay, good.
This is a big fight that I have with my friends because they're like, you're a workaholic. And I'm like, I'm having fun.
Yes,
If
I
I'm
feel
going to
the
exploit
same.
my own labor, it's different.
I feel the same way. I
Right?
had to assess it in therapy because I was
Right.
like, am I using work as an escape?
Yes.
And I was like, I'm having the time
I'm
of my
having the time
damn
of my
life.
Totally. And I ask myself every day, am I enjoying this? And if I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Because I've just seen what happens when we live lives that aren't prioritizing our mental health. We displace on other people,
Yeah.
and it becomes resentment, and then we police other people for having fun. And I think so much of what's happening in this country right now, it's a bunch of people who believe the limiting belief system that they had to die in order to express themselves. And so when they see people expressing themselves, having fun, they're like, wait, what do you mean that life gets to be pleasurable? And they're defending at the altar of their own misery. And I'm not interested in that.
So I am hesitant to take our fun conversation and get serious again, but I think that your work around loneliness is so important. So I'm going to segue a little bit. So
I mean, there's nothing more fun than talking about loneliness.
with other people
Totally.
who identify and understand.
That's me at the party being like, hey, everyone, can we talk about the international crisis of loneliness? Like, that's my small talk.
So you're
anecdote.
calling it the international crisis. It's actually a public health epidemic. The U.S. Surgeon General in 2017 declared it as such.
So happy. I was
Really?
like, finally, I need other people who are saying this.
Because you felt it all along.
My entire life.
Okay, so do you see the epidemic because you yourself felt lonely and you recognized it in other people?
Yeah. I think that most people mistake loneliness as living. They just think that's what it means to be alive. And
Right.
it's not. Because what I began to notice is that the very things that are most precious to me, the things I want to share the most in the world, are the things I'm not allowed to. Instead, I just have to walk around being like, I'm good. I'm well. How are you, sir? How is the weather? It's so stunted. What I actually want to be like is like, okay, so how do you process jealousy? Like, how did you move on from your last ex? Like, could you share that? Because actually each one of us have so much expertise on what it means to be human. And when we remember that, then every single person is a potential renowned world scholar.
Yes. I feel that way in every interview, even if I'm talking to somebody in an Uber.
Totally.
So I interviewed somebody on loneliness, and they told me that, especially towards the end of your life, loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. That's the effect it has on your health. So one antidote I've found is exactly what you said. It's conversation, right? It's like bringing your authentic self to the table. Some people don't want to do that. Like if I just met you and I said, so can you tell me about how you handle jealousy? We would be best friends because we have that, we're on the same wavelength there. Not everybody's like that. So how do you approach conversation with people when you're still trying to feel them out?
I get that I'm not for everyone. And so it's a filtration technique where I'm at a party and people are like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm actually really spiraling right now. And I'm questioning like what the purpose of existence is. If people are willing to engage with me, I've made new friends. If they're not, I'm like, have a great day and we move on.
Right.
I don't need to judge people for being at where they're at. That's their own healing journey. That's their own ministry. I can't comment on it. But I do know that for me, it's essential that I have people that I can be honest with. Because my entire childhood, I had to be dishonest. And I saw what happens on the other side of that. You feel a hollow sense of existence, like you're a character and not like you're a soul. And so when I'm able to have conversations where I can bring my full self, my honesty, my contradiction, my complexity, that's where I feel most happy.
So there's this term that I just learned called TERF. And you're probably like rolling your eyes like you just learned about it. However, I'm an avid reader, and I think and genuinely interested in gender dynamics. And so because I hadn't heard of this term, I was like, I think a lot of people haven't heard of this term. So you make a distinction about entitlement when it comes to a specific wave of feminism, and your use of the word TERF sent me down a rabbit hole because I had to reread first, second, and third wave feminism. So can you explain to me what a TERF is?
Yeah. So TERFs are anti-trans feminists who believe that trans people have been detrimental to women's rights and women's issues. And that's an incorrect framework because actually trans rights are an extension of feminism. And it's the result of a divide and conquer strategy where people who are being harmed by patriarchy end up competing for a few scarce resources rather than actually working together to overthrow the patriarchy. So all the issues that have been longstanding issues in feminism, workplace equality, sexual harassment, gender-based violence, are issues faced by trans people. And there's been a propaganda campaign to try to teach people that trans people are a threat or distracting or detracting away from issues facing women, when this is a false distinction because there are trans people who are women to begin with.
I don't understand how we just keep repeating history. Like, the feminist movement was exclusionary of people that were not white. That was awful, did not get us anywhere. Like, I don't understand how we keep doing this. There's constantly people to exclude.
Well, I think another way of asking your question is, why do humans continue to be humans?
Yeah.
You know? Like,
why do humans keep humaning?
Yeah, totally. And that's why I have compassion, because I'm like, it makes so much sense. When you have been marginalized your entire life, what you think will offer you salvation is getting power over other people. Because what you've been taught stability is domination. But here's the secret. Actually, what true power is the creation of a world without hierarchy. What true power is where each person is just allowed to vibe without you controlling or policing them. So I get the false temptation of domination, but it's not gonna deliver you what you seek. So many people are spending their entire lives climbing trees that bear no fruit. And I'm just sitting here having a party with my Technicolor Dreamcoat, literally with all of my colors in the world saying, why don't we eat the fruit of the table? And people are like, no, I'm gonna go chase it up there. It doesn't exist over there.
No.
So I get it as a trauma response. I get it and I have compassion for it. What I don't have space for is the promotion of misinformation and disinformation that has made people think that trans people are some detrimental threat, when, as we spoke about before, people like me can exist in public without fear of violent persecution. And there's something morally bankrupt about a world that inflates our sense of power and authority whenever we can't even exist.
I think regardless of gender, the idea of finding your own identity is just so universal. Is there a part of your identity that you still struggle with?
There's so many parts of myself I still struggle with. I am so used to hating myself. That part of me comes back all the time.
I hate hearing that, Alok.
Yeah, I hate hearing it too. But I have to love it in order for it to stop.
Yeah.
It's been my most reliable, I say that hatred has been the most reliable lover in my life. It's someone that I could always go back to. I know it so well. I'm so familiar with self-hatred. It was installed in me at a very young age and I held it close. And it thought that it was protecting me, because if I hated myself, then if anything else anyone said to me couldn't hurt me like I could hurt me. So, oh, you don't like me? Well, I don't like me either. So what? There's a fatalism, a kind of latent suicidality to it. And now that I'm excited at being alive, pretty smart idea, always on brand, all right? I was like, okay, I need to start working on this self-hatred piece of me. And I started to realize I had a perverse attachment to my self-hatred because it's familiar. It's easy for me to go to. What would a version of me that was self-loving look like? I don't know them. And so I'm now getting accustomed with actually saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's better than I hate. It's easier to say, I'm curious on what it would look like for me to be self-loving right now.
Curious. I love having a question to ask yourself when you are in those states. I'm curious what it would look like if. which I guess goes right back to your limitless
Mm-hmm.
notion.
I mean, honestly, if I could go from when I was younger, I didn't allow any video or audio recordings of myself because I thought my voice was too feminine, my gestures were too feminine, and then people would make fun of me for being gay, and then I would experience violence, and then I would die. That was where my head went. To
It's
now,
like 0 to 100.
yeah, to now, me being able to sit with you, unapologetic in what I am wearing and who I am, that shows me that things can change that we thought were permanent.
Right.
I thought that self-hatred would be a permanent resident in my heart. And now it's just a visiting guest. And that's progress. And I think we have to announce progress because I think right now there's so much jadedness and cynicism in this world. Like we're just stuck. But alongside it, there's so many everyday acts of triumph within ourselves and within each other. And it feels important to speak them. That most triumphs aren't grandiose. They're not like extreme declarations of progress. Often those are performative. They're not actually real.
Yeah.
They're subtle gestures that we notice ourselves taking up a little bit more space, advocating for ourselves a little bit more, and they deserve to be elevated as triumphs.
They happen for me so out of the blue. Do they for you too?
Mm-hmm.
So you say the lungs, they are for breathing. The heart is for forgiving. What's the hardest lesson you've learned about forgiveness?
Self-forgiveness is the hardest lesson.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy for me to understand everyone else's complex emotional landscapes. This is my empath crisis. Like, it totally makes sense why you were so cruel to me because you're being cruel to yourself.
Right.
But where I find it most difficult is like, I still have a perfectionist complex for my 5-year-old self.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here being like, why didn't you tell your parents that you were queer and that you needed their support and help because you were gonna get bullied at school?
Right,
And
at
then my-
5.
Right, and then my neighbors were like, you were literally 5 years old. I'd be like, but I could have been a child prodigy at healing trauma, okay? Some people learn 10 languages. I could have learned PTSD therapy.
I was the Beethoven of PTSD.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
why not? And so now I'm really trying to forgive myself for who I had to become in order to survive. And that is the most difficult work because the self-flagellating has been a driving mechanism for me for a lot of my life. Improve yourself, become better, maximize, optimize, become funnier, read more books, become smarter. And now that's no longer fueling me. And so what I'm trying to actually fuel me now is like curiosity, wonder, awe, beauty, very different tactics than shame.
Do you have a good group of friends now?
Oh, the best.
When did you find them?
The great part about touring is that I get to travel the world and my friends are scattered in every continent. And they're often people who I don't see that often. They're people I'll see like once every year, once every 2 years. But when we're together, it's like I sink into it and I'm like, I'm not alone, you know? And so I think my art was a way of meeting other people who felt the same fears, the same loneliness, the same pain. And so in that way, I understand that even though I was writing about my own life, I was actually asking a question, like, does anyone else feel the same way? And I was able to find people through my art who have been my best friends.
There's this quote I heard when I was younger that the people that have been through the most have the most to give. And I don't mean it in a martyrdom way, but it just seems like the depth of what you're able to feel and explain is so great.
I have so much love for the world. And this is why living in New York is often kind of challenging because I love everyone so hard. And that's difficult when you see like 15,000 people on a beginning of a day. So I'm just literally walking around being like, I love you. Like I'm rooting for you so hard. I have so much love to give because I know how hard it is to be alive. And I operate from the premise that everyone is suffering from something that they're not telling me or that they're not telling their friends. Everyone is suffering with this kind of pain and loneliness. So I have to show up with that in mind, which requires a daily practice of benevolence and kindness.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to give that. And then someone will just, it's New York, so they'll just be like.
Someone called me and said, why is your content all so fucking earnest? And it kind of hurt my feelings. And I did a reflection exercise. And I was like, I guess it is kind of earnest, but I'm earnest. And you just said that you're earnest too, which makes me feel better.
Yeah, I was saying earnesty is my most controversial identity. People think my hot take is that there are more than 2 genders, but my actual hot take is that humans are worth it. My actual hot take is that every single person can be transformed and that redemption is a beautiful thing. My hot take is that it's worth committing to love in a world that is so loveless and painful. My hot take is it's worth showing up with vulnerability even when people shut it down because you're making a perforation in the surface.
Yeah.
And you never know how that's going to change the world, just being kind. So it's taken me a long time because I used to have so much cringeworthiness around my earnesty. Like I didn't want to say out loud, I love you. Like, but now I'm really trying to speak that part of me to actually say, I love being alive. I love people. I'm so excited by the world. And it feels controversial because people are so used to minimizing their joy, minimizing, like, you don't really want to tell people how much you care. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, death is a omnipresent reality in my life. And I have to really think, I might not be here tomorrow. And what I started to realize is, therefore, that's an amazing opportunity for me to live the fullest version of my life, the most incandescent and true version of my life, so that if I go, God willing I don't, I'm not going to be sitting there having any regrets.
Yes.
So earnesty for me is a way of living a life without regret.
You just gave me so much peace. Because I've been looking at it as like, am I naive? Am I not seeing something? Am I like a Midwest, happy-go-lucky? And maybe I am all those things, but I do like that I'm earnest. I like that I'm kind when it's inconvenient. I like that I believe in people. So thank you for that. Thank you for affirming me. My job was to affirm you in this interview, but of course you're you, and
It's
so
a
you
false
affirmed
binary,
me.
so mutual affirmations.
Okay, rapid fire. Are you ready?
Never ready, but I'll try.
Never ready, always willing.
Yes.
A piece of art that will always move you.
Rihanna in the yellow dress at the Met Gala.
Not what I thought you were going to say. Who has loved you really, really well?
My favorite book series called The Wheel of Time.
Also not what I thought you were going to say. You've had some pinch me experiences. Which has been the pinchiest so far?
Looking in the mirror and saying, hey.
And feeling fun and happy while you say it? Someone we should all be following online. Someone you learn from, someone that you find interesting.
Imara Jones, an amazing trans journalist who was recently selected as one of the Time 100.
A book that changed your life, something you think everybody should read.
There are so many, but I'm going to be really cliche right now and say Perks of Being a Wallflower was so important to me as a teenager.
Why?
I was so angsty, and I got that validated, that there were other people who felt pain like me.
Are you still angsty?
Always.
It's in your eyes.
Yeah. Equal measure, earnest and angsty. Yeah.
Earnest angst.
Like, my entire brain is just an emo rock band just waiting to happen.
It is.
Every
but
thought.
like a very colorful emo
totally,
rock band.
Yeah, totally. Healing hurts. They're like smiling in through the tears. I feel like I'm the embodiment of the lol sob emoji.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Everybody should pick an emoji that represents them. Pick up that card deck, question everything. 52 cards for deeper conversation. Whichever one speaks to you. I always think people get the card that they're supposed to get.
When have you felt the closest to magic in your life?
Oh, I'm so happy you got that one.
Oh. Okay, so I've been doing this really reckless thing where I'll be invited to give like a keynote lecture for like an hour, and I won't know what I'm saying until I start.
Don't tell me that. I have secondhand anxiety.
Yeah. I just literally will make it up on the spot on like 3 hours of sleep, thousands of people in front of me, and I'll make it up on the spot. And then afterwards, people are like, wow, how long have you been working on that speech? It must have been prepared. And I was like, I just made it all up. And so now I started to realize that is part of my magic practice. Improvised speech is where I thrive.
Do you, humility aside, in order to be a speaker like that, do you have to have like incredibly high intellect, or what skill set do you possess that allows you to do that?
I think I love language. And so
That's
I think I have
amazing.
like a thesaurus in my brain. And so every time I say a word, like adore, I can think of like 16 words that sound like adore, or that are alliterated with adore, or that are synonyms with adore. And so my I guess it's because I stopped seeing language as like trying to convince people or explain things, and more about having fun.
Yeah.
And so my relationship with speech is like, let me make up grammar. Oh, there's not a word that exists. Let me make up that word. Let me come up with a new sentence structure. So it's like I'm painting something with language.
Limitless. What's the smartest decision you've ever made?
I think there's been many, but one that comes to mind right now is wearing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. There was so much advice that I was getting of like, okay, story time. When I first went to college, my mom and I had this epic fight where she was like, no one is going to take you seriously because you dress like a theater major. And I said, first of all, theater is serious business. Okay, do not offend that community. Second of all, I need to bring my 9 suitcases with me. I don't know what college is going to give, but I know what my shoes are, okay? And she was like, why do you care about clothes are superficial? And that was installed in me from such a young age of like obsession with your clothes is vanity and real higher order thinking is. And actually what people don't understand is that when I'm dressed as I want, that allows me to do this improvised speech. It allows me to channel. It allows me to have access to honesty. Because in the same ways that we decorate altars, why don't we decorate ourselves? In the same way that decoration and ornamentality have always been ways of acknowledging the divine, why don't we do that to ourselves? And clothing actually, and accessories for me are a way of actually finding my sacredness, of being able to welcome it. And I think that people only understand dressing up as for other people, and that's never been my experience. It's always been about welcoming myself back to myself.
I have one last question for you. What has it meant to you to find a community of people online who are for you?
It's meant so much because now I have the experience of like getting harassed in public and being able to post on Instagram and be like, hey everyone, I'm getting harassed in public. And people say, we're rooting for you.
Right.
When I was a child, I would get harassed and not be able to tell anyone. And so I had to deal with that burden on my own. But now I can say, when you're harassing me, you're harassing all these other people who love me.
Yeah.
And you might think that I'm just some freak on the street, but actually there's a lot of people who love me. And right now it's easier for me to show up for myself when I remember that I'm part of something bigger.
In these interviews, I feel like I get to live to learn better in some way. And my preconceived sort of thought about our conversation was, I'm going to have a different perspective on gender. I'm going to be able to learn a different vocabulary. I am walking away from this interview feeling like fun. Fun first. I love that that's what I took away from it. So thank you so much. I had so much fun.
Me too. It was so much fun. I need to get one of these decks.